Hello and welcome to the Art of Being Human. In order to understand what fear does to you, it might help you to understand what kind of fear that you have, because there are different types of fear and they affect you in different kinds of ways. There are like a phobia where you're only afraid if you're faced with a phobia. There are generalized anxiety disorders where you're afraid all the time. There are just different types of fears. So I'm going to give you a list and define them a little bit. And you might be able to pinpoint what kind of fear and what kind of anxiety you have. And then I'll go back and I'll become more deeply involved in explaining what each one is. But here are the different types of fear with a short definition. In a generalized anxiety disorder, this is sometimes abbreviated GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. And you become afraid about anything and everything, any time of day, any time of night. You're just plain fearful, just plain nervous. You can't seem to get rid of it. You don't know what it's connected to. And it's just that state of anxiety and fear that some people have. I had one of my students who was anxious and nervous all the time. And if you asked him about it, he said, yeah, I'm like this every day. Every day I'm very, very nervous. And I said, do you know what you're nervous about? I have no idea. But I think with him there was something going wrong physically with his system, because you don't necessarily feel anger and anxiety if there's nothing that's causing it. But in general anxiety you do, but it doesn't mean that you should have to go through that. There are ways of helping you with it. But that's GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. Then there's anticipatory anxiety. A lot of people have anticipatory anxiety. It's anxiety about a specific thing that's coming up. You know, you have a dentist appointment, you're terrified of going to the dentist, and then you become very, very afraid because of the fact that you've got to go, and you may make the appointment a month in advance, and that whole month you're nervous. So you're anticipating something that comes up. And when you get there and do it, a lot of times that anxiety just recedes, it's just gone. How come? Because you've been anticipating the worst. You've been anticipating going to the doctor because you're afraid of what the report would be. Or you've been anticipating something bad happen. And this is a specific event that you know is going to happen. It's not something that you conjure up in your mind. It's not like general anxiety. This is a specific event. And you know you've got to take the test, and you know you've got to pass it, or you're in trouble. You won't be able to drive, or you won't be able to go on to graduate school. And it's a specific real thing. It's nothing made up in your mind. It's very real. And you become very afraid of it. And then when you get to it and do it, it's gone. The anxiety goes away. I had a friend of mine who was an actress, and she used to do a lot of off-Broadway plays. And she used to say that there were people that were so anxious that they actually developed migraines before they went on stage. And she was very nervous too. Once they get on stage and start saying their first words, the anxiety is gone and they feel fine. How come? Because when you're actually doing it or in that situation, it's no longer anticipatory. Anticipatory is when you're looking towards something that's happening, and you may be hopeful for it, but you may be afraid of it. You anticipate something being bad. You anticipate failing the test. You anticipate all of that. And then when you're there and you're doing it, it's an actual event. It's no longer anticipatory. And then the fear fades away. And usually you find out it's not near as bad as what you thought it was going to be. You built up all kinds of fear in your mind. You've anticipated the worst, but the worst doesn't happen. You go to the doctor, you don't have cancer. You pass the test, there's no problem. You feel very comfortable in taking the test. You go to the dentist, it doesn't hurt. He makes you very comfortable, or she makes you very comfortable. So the anticipation is gone. And when the anticipation is is gone because it now is a real active event, then you normally lose that type of fear. Now, a panic attack is a little different. A panic attack is what I described in the last segment about the woman screaming in the hall of the college that I was teaching at. And she was just screaming because she felt intense fear, intense anxiety. And she felt probably like she was going to die. It's a sudden panic, and a person doesn't know why they've got it. It seems to come out of the blue. It's obviously connected to something, but they don't know where it's coming from. They don't know why they feel that way, and the body is reacting with very, very severe anxiety. And then phobia is another type. It's fearful of a specific thing. And you don't become anxious until you face that thing. Supposing you're afraid of crossing bridges. Then a lot of people are afraid of crossing bridges. We had a bridge in Maine, and the story got started that every year 3 people died on that bridge. Well, the bridge was old and rickety and made out of wood, and when you went over it, what happened was you could feel the bumps, you could hear a rumbling because the wood wasn't really secure, and so it was just a rumor, I think, that 3 people died on it every year, but this rumor was believed by a lot of people. So a lot of people who are afraid of bridges, and I think there are really quite a few, couldn't or didn't want to go over that bridge, and they became very fearful of that particular bridge. Now, some people are afraid of all bridges. There are ways of healing that, but you could be phobic about anything. You get bit by a dog, and so therefore now you're afraid of dogs. But these kinds of phobias tend to spread. If you're bit by a dog, so now you're afraid of a dog, pretty soon you may be afraid of any animal that has 4 legs, and most of them do. You'd be afraid of cats, you'd be afraid of rabbits, because who knows, anything can bite. And so after that, you see, the fear gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. But usually you don't have fear until you face that thing that you have a phobia about, that bridge, a dog, or whatever it is. You can be fearful of anything. Now, fears can be simple or they can be complex. Now, a simple phobia would be that something happened to you, so you're afraid of repeating that thing. It gets very close to being like a panic attack because you'll get panicky. Sometimes a fear or a phobia mixed in with fear because you're afraid of that thing becomes panic. And what you want to do, you want to stay away from that thing because you don't want to experience the panic. So sometimes there's kind of a conjunction between the fear, between the phobia and a panic reaction. Now, a complex fear would be when you're afraid of several things and it kind of generalizes into a phobia about something. Now, what that something is probably going to be something symbolic of what you're afraid of, but it's not limited to the simple thing of I get bit by a dog, so now I'm afraid of dogs. I can understand where people who go on the shores and they get bit by a shark because they don't know a shark is there and they're swimming and they nearly lose their leg or something. I can understand where they would have a phobia of going in water. Any kind of water would be frightening to them because it would be a reminder of what happened. So there is that intertwining of a panic reaction plus the phobia, or there can be. It doesn't mean that it happens in all cases, but it can be. Now, there is such a thing as a social phobia. In a social phobia, you can't be around people. You don't want to be around people. People frighten you. They might hurt you. They might hit you. They might say something that's nasty to you, and you may not want to be around them. You don't want to be around social events because things can happen in social events. You don't want to go on a cruise because some people get raped on a cruise. You might even fall overboard. It's the fear of being around people and what they can do to you or what you're fearful they will do to you that makes a difference to you, and you want to stay away. So how do you stay away? You stay by yourself. You only visit certain friends. You don't go out of the house if you don't need to. You don't go into crowds. You wouldn't want to be at New York City, say, on New Year's Eve, or a time that they would have tons of people that would be celebrating an event. You want to stay away from all of those people. You want to be by yourself or just with a few friends, and that would be the end of it. You really don't want to get involved with anybody that's going to hurt you, or you anticipate. There's a lot of conjunction between the various types of fears. One can lead to another. If I was afraid of people, I might not want to go anywhere where there are a lot of people, but at the same time, I would become, housebound. I might not be able to go out. I want to stay in. I don't want anyone to hurt me in any way. And so you see that you can get a combination of these fears together. Now, obsessive-compulsive disorder is a little more complicated. If you are an obsessive-compulsive person, you do things like count the cracks on the sidewalk when you're walking. You are a person who stands in front of your stove for a half an hour wondering if you really did take and turn the stove off. You go half a mile down the street. You're so scared that maybe, just maybe, you didn't turn the stove off. Even though you knew very well that you did, you turn back. You've got to check it that one time more than what you needed to. Or you see, if you are going to be dressed, you have to button the buttons on your vest a certain way. Well, what if something happens and it interrupts you? You've got to start all over. You've got to get dressed again. You've got to count the buttons. You've got to make sure you button it. It can be very, very debilitating, because if you don't follow the rules that you have set for yourself, then you have to start and do it all over again. So why do people become obsessive-compulsive? Usually they have a lot of obsessive thoughts. These are thoughts that they don't want. These are always negative thoughts. And in order to control the thoughts, they develop a behavior that is supposed to manage the thoughts so that it doesn't run away with them. Manage the thoughts so they can control them, so they don't have them anymore, or so it doesn't bother them. And so they do these odd things. They have these odd little quirks. They wash their hands. Well, that must not be clean enough because I touched something. Okay, I touched the desk. That means I got to go back and I got to wash my hands again. There might be a germ on that desk somewhere. Or I opened the door for somebody. That means maybe a bug flew in or something. Whoops, back in washing my hands again. People's hands are raw, constantly washing their hands. What they're trying to do is stop the obsessive thoughts. And they may not even be aware of what all these obsessive thoughts are, but they're there. And so therefore they've got to do something to stop them. Or if they're walking along, they can only put their right foot on a certain part of the sidewalk, and the left foot has to go to another part of the sidewalk. It can become very, very, very complicated. It can be very, very bad. And it can be very debilitating because you just really don't get anything done. You're constantly managing the obsessive thoughts by your compulsive behavior. Those things that you do over and over again are compulsions. And these compulsions are important because they manage or try to manage it, your compulsive, your obsessive thoughts. Hoarding is considered by some people to be compulsive behavior because in order to control your thoughts, you get things. And when you get things, that helps you to cover up those thoughts. But then it adds to more hoarding, more things that you have, more things that you can't stand because you don't have the space for them. So it both answers a problem and creates a problem at the same time. I've seen movies about people who are hoarders where there's no place to put anything and they're walking on things. They can't sit down on a couch, it's all covered. And a lot of the stuff is just no good, it's just trash. And they don't throw away their trash. They have to keep it. It belongs to them. What about a woman who has broken a hanger and only a hanger has half of the side because the other side broke off? Is she going to throw it away? Well, most people would. Well, she might not. Who knows? You might be able to use a half a hanger for something. And so it just becomes debilitating more and more and more. And you're walking all over the junk and it's just terrible. So what you really want to do is to have somebody clean out all the stuff, but you're afraid of getting rid of things because those things could be important at some time. That's obsessive compulsive. Then you have post-traumatic stress disorder, and what I'm going to do at some point, I think, is go in more deeply to post-traumatic stress, but I have mentioned before, you have either seen a traumatic event and it's bothered you so much that you can't recover from it. And there it is, and you think about it all the time. Or you've participated unwillingly in a traumatic event that's bothered you. You got in an accident, somebody punched you out at a ball game. It's something that can be very hurtful to you, and you become afraid. You become afraid of what is going to happen next, and so therefore you stay away from people. You have stress, and you don't know what to do about it, and it just causes you to be so debilitated that you can't behave in a normal way. You can't enjoy normal life. And I want to mention cold emotion. You don't see it listed a lot in a lot of lists of different types of fear, but there is such a thing as cold emotion, but it's simple to explain. Cold emotion is when you've taken a medication and the medication makes you nervous. It's not because you're nervous because of something that's happened to you, and usually you would realize you took a cold medication a half an hour ago. Now you're not sneezing anymore, but you're very jittery. You're very nervous, but there's a fake quality about the nervousness. It doesn't seem like that nervousness is connected to anything, and it really isn't. It's only connected to the fact that the medication brought it on. Eventually, as the medication wears off, the nervousness will too. It's not really a psychodynamic thing, but because it does exist, I want to at least mention it to you. If you have medications that you're taking and you feel nervous after you take them, you might want to check with a doctor. Could the medication be causing it? There isn't much medication, I think, that really does this, but cold medications, asthma medications. I remember taking a medication. I was sick with a cold or something, and the doctor gave me some medication, and when I took it about 15 or 20 minutes later, which is when the medication took effect, I suddenly felt very, very nervous over nothing, but I was very jittery, very nervous. But I realized it was probably the medication I'd been given, and when the medication wore off, the nervousness wore off. Needless to say, I never took that medication again. But that's cold emotion, and it does happen, so I just want to bring it up. The results of fear that you have is going to make you feel isolated. It's going to make you feel sometimes like you're going crazy, especially if you're having a panic attack and nothing seems right. Now, my main take on fears is that the main fears that people have in their lives, and I think we can reduce a lot of the fears, is the fear of abandonment and the fear that they're going to have to go through whatever trauma that they have to go through and do it alone without help. Nobody there to help them through it, nobody there to talk to. A fear of abandonment happens early. It can start in infancy when a baby realizes that mom is gone. But of course, the baby's not mature enough to realize that the mom is only in the next room and she's coming right back. They don't know that. To be gone from the baby means to be gone forever, not to even exist anymore. And it is thought that some fears of abandonment stem from that early age, when a child is not able to figure out that the mother, even though she's not there, it doesn't mean that she's far away, and it doesn't mean that she's not coming back. I remember getting a call. My mother and I got a call from one of my nephews, and he was about 5 or 6 years old. And he called my mother, his grandmother, because he felt he was all alone in a big house. Well, my sister had a big house. She had a big family. And he was about 5 or 6, and he called. He knew how to use the phone. And he says, "Grandma, I'm all alone in this big house." And you could see he was very distressed. And he said, "But of course, I'm not afraid, but I am really alone in this big house." Well, it didn't take my mother and I long to get over there. What he didn't realize is his mother mother was just hanging out clothes on a clothesline, and she was there all along. She would never leave her children alone. But he didn't know that, and he became frightened. So he's thinking that Mom is gone, and Mom may not be coming back, and I'm all alone in this big house. What if something happens? Well, who's going to take care of me? And that's also part of the abandonment and how it gets started. Who's going to take care of me if my mother dies, if my father dies, if there's nobody around to take care of me? I knew one poor girl whose parents were both killed in an accident. They were riding together in a car. They got into an accident and they both were killed. So both her parents were gone. And she ended up by having to have mental health care in a hospital for a while. And I don't know what happened with her. She probably lived with another relative. She wasn't quite a teenager. She was young. She wasn't old enough so she should be alone all the time and take care of herself, although she wasn't a young child either. So the abandonment fears, I think, sometimes are at the crux of what we go through in other fears, and they start early. But this is kind of a theory, and some people differ in their theories, but this is what my perspective is. Now, I'm going to go, we have enough time here, so I'm going to go into the general anxiety disorder, the symptoms of it, and be more specific about it. This is the first type of fear that I talked about. If you have general anxiety disorder, it's very common, GAD. These are the symptoms that you may experience. You may be tired for no reason, have headaches, have muscle tension and aches, have a hard time swallowing, being trembling, twitching, irritable, sweating, nausea. You might be lightheaded. You might feel like you're out of breath or feel like it's hard to breathe. You may use the bathroom a lot. You may have hot flashes. There are all kinds of these physical symptoms that go along with the anxiety. Anxiety does change you. Anxiety does give you physical symptoms. Now, we are kind of running out of time, and I'm going to probably review this at our next session and then go on with the different types of anxiety and the specifics of what the symptoms are. I've given you some kind of hints. I've talked about it somewhat, but I want to get into it in more detail. And what I'm hoping you'll be able to do, if you're suffering from anxiety, I'm hoping you'll be able to kind of pinpoint which one you fit into, because it does make a difference in how it's treated and how you can get help for it. So we'll close it here, and please join me next time.